Welcome back to Intro to Philosophy 1010, the summer 2019 session. Our book is Introduction to World Philosophy, and in this video we're going over Plato and Aristotle. This is for exam 4, and the question is for part B, number 7. How is Plato's concept of the three parts of the soul in the Republic similar to Aristotle's virtue theory? So Aristotle's virtue theory is in the Nicomachean Ethics, which starts on page 90. So in the previous video, we compared the three parts of the soul in the Republic to the three parts of the soul in Plato's dialogue called the Phaedrus, and then we compared that to Ishvara Krishna and Patanjali's explanations of the three modes of nature, or the three gunas: goodness, passion, and ignorance, sattva, tama, and raja guna. So in this video, we're going on to Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, and we'll be going over Aristotle again in subsequent videos. So this one, I'm just going to focus on the idea of three parts of the soul. And then in the next video, I'll get more into the depths of Aristotle's virtue theory. So on page 93, this is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. On the right-hand column, about halfway down, he says, some things are said about it, all right, the soul. So he's saying the student of politics must study the soul. And some things are said about it adequately enough, even in the discussions outside our school. And we must use these. For example, that one element in the soul is irrational, and one has a rational principle. So this is Aristotle, who was a student in Plato's academy. He started his own school, the Lyceum, but he's saying some things were said well enough in that other school, and I think he's talking about Plato. So the soul has two parts. Now it's going to expand into three, just like we saw in the Republic. Socrates first started out saying there's a rational and an irrational part of the soul, and then he inserted a third in between the two, which is passion. And we'll see Aristotle doing the same, most likely just following what he learned from Plato. So two elements in the soul: one element is irrational and one has a rational principle. Then he goes on to say whether these are separated as the parts of the body or of anything divisible or are distinct by definition but by nature inseparable, like convex and concave in the circumference of a circle, does not affect the present question. So is the soul a simple thing with no parts, or is it a composite thing made up of parts? Are these elements of the soul separate from each other, or are they just different ways of expressing the same thing? He says it doesn't matter for our purposes, which is political science. He's writing how a politician should think and behave, and the politician should study the soul, because the politician's looking for the ultimate good and to make the people in the society good. So the politician has to know what a soul is in order to make it virtuous. So we'll get into all that, but right now we're just the three parts of the soul. So he says, of the irrational element, one division seems to be widely distributed and vegetative in nature. I mean that which causes nutrition and growth, for it is a kind of power of the soul that one must assign to all nurslings and to embryos. Now this excellence of the soul seems to be common to all species. Okay, so his categorizations get a little complicated, and there doesn't exactly parallel the Republic, Plato's Republic. So what he's going to say is, all right, there's a soul. Now let's break it into two parts. You've got the rational and the irrational. And then he says, then he breaks up the irrational part of the soul into three subdivisions: vegetative, which all life forms have in common. They just absorb nutrients and grow. The next one is perception, which even animals have. You know, vegetables can't see or smell or hear, but dogs can. So dogs have the vegetative part of the soul and also the power of perception. And then also there's desire, which is what we saw in Plato. For Plato in the Republic, there's reason, there's passion, or the spirited element, and then there's desire, the appetitive, the appetites. And we're going to see Aristotle make the same basic division. Because of the irrational part, you've got the vegetative that all life forms have, perception that animals have in common, with vegetables, and then desire. So animals desire too. And then he'll talk about desire. Some people are continent and some people are incontinent. So that's the breakdown of desire. When a person is continent, they have this passionate desire to obey reason. And that is just exactly what we saw Plato say in the Republic. So continuing here on, I'm going to move over to page 94, the left-hand column, the second paragraph. There seems to be also another irrational element in the soul, one which in a sense, however, shares in a rational principle, for we praise the rational principle of the continent man and of the incontinent, and the part of their soul that has such a principle, since it urges them aright and towards the best objects. But there is found in them also another element naturally opposed to the rational principle, which fights against and resists that principle. All right, so I'll stop there. So there seems to be also another irrational element in the soul, but it shares an irrational principle. So the desiring part of the irrational part of the soul, one of those parts of desire is it tends to obey reason, and that's why he's saying he further subdivides the irrational part so that it kind of shares in reason, and yet it's also connected to desire. And so now I'll continue here. So it urges them aright and towards the best objects, but there's found, all right, for exactly as paralyzed limbs, when we intend to move them to the right, turn on the contrary to the left, so it is with the soul. The impulses of incontinent people move in contrary directions, contrary to reason. But while in the body we see that which moves astray, in the soul we do not. No doubt, however, we must nonetheless suppose that in the soul too there is something contrary to the rational principle, resisting and opposing it. So he says, in what sense it is distinct from the other elements does not concern us. So he's not worried about, are there really three parts of the soul, or is it one? I talked about that in the previous video, about the mortal soul, that the subtle material body is subject to the three modes of nature, which Plato calls reason, passion, and appetites. Okay, so the bottom paragraph, the left-hand column, page 94. Therefore, the irrational element also appears to be twofold. For the vegetative element in no way shares an irrational principle, but the appetitive and, in general, the desiring element in a sense shares in it, insofar it listens to and obeys it, meaning it obeys the rational principle. This is the sense in which we speak of taking account of one's father or one's friends, not that in which we speak of accounting for a mathematical property. That the irrational element is in some sense persuaded by a rational principle is indicated also by the giving of advice and by all reproof and exhortation. And if this element also must be said to have a rational principle, that which has a rational principle, as well as that which has not, will be twofold. One subdivision having it in the strict sense and in itself, that's just the rational part of the soul, and the other having a tendency to obey as one does one's father. So we see the basic parallel with Plato's Republic. You've got three parts of the soul for Plato in the Republic: reason, passion, and appetites. And passion's intermediary, although it's part of the irrational part of the soul. So the irrational has two parts, appetites and then this passion. But the passion can also be said to be a part of reason, in a sense that it tends to obey reason and then try to force the appetites in line. But we saw in Plato's Republic, what happens more often than not is that the desiring, no, it was in the Phaedrus, the desiring part tends to overwhelm reason and passion. So just to go back over, in the Republic, on page 87, the left-hand column, he says, and if you suppose something which pulls a thirsty soul away from drink, that must be different from the thirsty principle which draws him like a beast to drink. For, as we were saying, the same thing can't at the same time, with the same part of itself, act in contrary ways about the same thing. So if you've ever had a desire to drink water, and then something in you says, no, don't drink right now, now's not the time. That proves there's two parts of your soul. And so continuing down on the left-hand column, and the forbidding principle is derived from reason, and that which bids and attracts proceeds from passion and disease, clearly. Then we may fairly assume that they are two, and that they differ from one another. The one with which a man reasons we may call the rational principle of the soul, and the other one he calls the appetitive. This is page 87, the right-hand column. Then let's finally determine that there are two principles existing in the soul, and what of passion or spirit? Is it a third or akin to one of the preceding? So he'll go on to say that passion is a part of the irrational element, but it obeys reason. Like in the state, these three modes are manifest in the three classes. The philosopher kings, the philosophers at the top, their auxiliaries, which are the mode of passion, and then the other classes, which are presided over by bodily appetites. So on page 88, he says, but when he thinks that he is the sufferer of the wrong, okay, so this is the passionate part, it tends to support justice. If you do something wrong and then people have their revenge on you, you don't get overwhelmed with indignation because you think, I deserve it, it's just. But if someone wrongs you and you didn't deserve it, then the passionate part becomes inflamed because it wants justice. And so he says, the illustration is perfect, he replied, and in our state, as we were saying, the auxiliaries were to be dogs and to hear the voice of the rulers, who are their shepherds. So the shepherds are the philosophers, the sheepdogs are the auxiliary class, the kind of the people who run the political affairs day to day, and then the sheep are the rest of the people. And he's saying that you have these three, justice is these three divisions of the soul, each acting according to what reason dictates. So when the appetites obey passion, which obeys reason, then you have justice in the individual soul. And when the philosopher class instructs the political class, who then keep the appetitive class harmonized, then you have a just state. So those are the three parts of the soul for Plato in the Republic, and we compare them to the three parts of the soul in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. So that was exam 4, part B, question 7. How is Plato's concept of the three parts of the soul in the Republic similar to Aristotle's virtue theory?